Hello, Ryan here, and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all of the news from the week just past. Be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, and let's get on with it. This week, we get a deep description of how the engineering mechanic is going to work, plus Alpha 318 has finally released to the live servers. So this week's Inside Star Citizen was another new Journey to 4.0. This time, it was a new design brief for the engineering gameplay. Now, the design briefs are basically where they run through the high-level plans for what the endgame engineering gameplay will play like, as all the heads of the various department teams get together and plan it all out just to nail it down and get a clear picture of what they need to do. Now, listening to this, it is far deeper than I ever expected it to be, and I was personally expecting a deep mechanic, but this is next level, and I truly love the intention here, offering massive levels of skill and understanding for those who want to pursue that career path. So with that said, here is the plan for engineering in Star Citizen. Now, the role of the engineer is to be in charge of all of the resources within the ship, the priorities of the items, and dealing with any of the issues that might arise. Now, kicking off with dangers, there are many dangers for the engineer to deal with, things that could go wrong with various components, and they say there are three types of dangers. You've got overheating, wear and tear, and malfunctioning. Now, overheating is both items running too hot or too cold, basically the temperature affecting these items, and to counter each, you can do so actively or passively. Passively is by way of the coolers that are already in your ships, and then actively could be to use a fire extinguisher to cool down the item, or maybe a blowtorch or flamethrower to heat it up, and it looks like overheating can also lead to a fire, but I do suspect that you can alter the temperature in your ship's interiors to help with that as well, or maybe just the external environments, opening the doors if you're on an ice planet or a hot moon, which could affect the temperature of your components either way. Now, wear and tear is simply the longer the item is running for, the less efficient it will become, requiring general maintenance, which will be affected by how much pressure you are putting that component under, like overclocking or just pushing it more than normal. And then finally, there are malfunctions in which the engineer must react to each one in very different ways depending on the specific malfunction. Now, all three of these potential dangers contribute to the overall health of the item and have an impact on each other. Now, as wear and tear and overheating are somewhat self-explanatory, he wanted to further talk about malfunctions, as these seem very varied and will certainly take a lot of knowledge and skill to know what to do with each one. Basically, different items, depending on the situation, can cause different errors, and the dev explains that these are just a few of them currently in development, not all of them. Firstly, you have disconnect, which is where you either don't have the item in place or a relay isn't in place. Power drop is the required amount of power not reaching the item. Misfire is generally wear and tear and how that impacts the functionality of the item. Cloggage is where resources are prevented from reaching your item. Power surge is too much energy reaching your item. And then leakage, which is similar to cloggage, where resources won't reach the item, but the cause is different. So I expect this will have things spewing out somewhere. There's also unresponsive. This is where any changes you apply to an item does not reach that item. They also have bugs, which can be also caused by hacking or being tuned incorrectly, affecting the item in some way, which is quite interesting. And they did say that they will be creative with some of these. And then you have destroyed, which, as you can imagine, is where your item is beyond repair. It is useless. You need to chuck it out and get a new one. And as mentioned before, these are just a few of them. There will be many more. Now, he says the reason for malfunctions, or introducing malfunctions, is because it is very relatable to real life. We have all dealt with malfunctioning equipment in some way, so this adds a whole new layer to the engineering profession, and gives those interested in pursuing this career choice more reason to study what could go wrong, the potential malfunctions, and how to fix them so that you are ready for them, or prevent the malfunctions from happening in the first place. Now, he says that if you don't react to some of the malfunctions in time, you could end up having a cascade of errors flowing through your ship, which could cause even more problems and eventually leading to the failure of your ship. Now, it is going to be quite phenomenal, especially when you're in battle, seeing these items go through their various states and having engineers running around trying to deal with them. It is probably going to be panic until people get trained. Now, the engineer is going to be a vital role in ships, and they do want to provide lots for us to do, and I will point out that it is very likely that CIG won't want the items to degrade super quickly. If you are just going about your business in a responsible way, and by that what I mean is if you are continuously pushing your items to the limits, like boosting constantly for no general reason, then do expect your items to degrade faster compared to if you're just running things on efficiency or just general day-to-day stuff, which will of course be very much determined not only by what you are doing or the situation you are involved in, but the components that you have chosen. Think of it like the sustenance meter on your character. If you are walking around, the need to eat and drink is much slower than if you are running and jumping everywhere. Now next up, he talks about item states, and understanding each item and its state is going to be important for you to do your job well. Now, each item has various states that it can be in, and these will differ per item, but these are basically the stages for the item that it goes through from its turning on phase to switching off phase. So for example, an item could have a boot up state, an ignition state, an idle state, an active state, then some might be in a primed state like an EMP, then a cooldown state, and then a restarted or off state. This then requires the engineer to pay attention to which state each item is in, as malfunctions can occur throughout each of those states, and that will determine what needs to be done to fix them, as it might need to be placed into a different state to get it fixed. So all of this and all of its complexity might require a few different types of engineers, or different hats as he puts it. You have the tuner, the mechanic, and the manager. Now although he does point out that this is more applicable to larger ships, for ships that are solo ships or smaller ships with smaller crew contingencies, you will be able to handle things on your own as the systems will be much smaller and simpler to use. But the tuner, for example, although I do prefer the term technician, but that is just a personal choice, they are responsible for the handling and setup of the ship. Pretty much based on what the manager's strategic decisions are, they will set up the items in advance depending on what you are going to do with your ship. So for example, if you're exploring, the tuner will set the items into states that are less prone to wear and tear and can sustain for longer periods of time, and are more resource efficient, which will certainly have a trade-off of course. The tuner can define item groups, base resource consumptions, they can min-max the settings, and a good tuner, if they do their job well, will be most busy before heading out, setting up the ship prior to leaving. However, having one working on the fly, just in case you run into uncertainties, will be very helpful as well, I'm sure. So basically, the tuner is helping to set up the ship based on the plan on what you are all heading out to do that day. And by the looks of things, it could be using a tablet to plug in and tune the item individually, or maybe as a group when defined. Now the next role is the mechanic, and this is what you dream of when you think about being an engineer. It is certainly what I think of, crawling through the Jeffries tubes, fixing items, being very hands-on, and the mechanic is responsible for fixing fuses, figuring out what could have caused the malfunction, and analysing the situations on site. And as there are many potential malfunctions or issues, the mechanic will need to know what to do for the best with each item based on their knowledge and understanding of what could go wrong. And they say that dealing with these issues could involve a minigame unique to that malfunction. Now, something I do want to point out is that on the progress tracker, one deliverable that is coming to a close this month is called FPS Devices, which says creating new items with different effects when used, including the development of deployable devices, or items that can be carried around as part of the player's loadout, equipped and deployed onto a surface. Now, we have heard about this a little bit with the multi-tool functionality in the monthly report, how it will interact with components and so forth, and a lot of this could be applicable more to actual combat scenarios, but seeing that the tuner and the mechanic will have to interact with different components in varying ways based on what is needed, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see engineering tools that are not just lasers, but actual tactile items that have us interacting with the item in a visceral way. Now, the manager is the one who uses the engineering screen to monitor the state of your ship, dispatching the mechanics or tuners where needed, or even fixing certain malfunctions from their screen if applicable. They also manage the resource consumption via the terminal based on what the tuner's presets are, or just manually controlling the resource distribution, working together with the bridge crew to ensure all is going well. So for example, the pilot on the bridge might report a power loss to a certain system. The engineering manager or officer on the deck will then check out the issue on the schematic, and then request the mechanic to go to Room X to take a look at the item and do what is necessary to get that system up and running again. Now this is going to be so much fun for orgs, or just those in multi-crew ships, as it can establish a bit of a hierarchy with the most experienced senior members of the engineering team as the managers or the officer, having the technicians and mechanics as trainees perhaps, or learning the ropes with more experienced crew members, and will be so interesting to learn from other players what to do when the item goes wrong, or what it could mean when this item malfunctions in this certain way. It creates so much depth to where players will be pretty much neck deep trying to maintain their ships in its bowels, not even knowing what is going on the outside. And for solo pilots or smaller crewed ships, it just gives us something to do while we are travelling around, because as we know, quantum travel, flying from point to point, can take a long time and can feel quite boring, but if we have things to interact with, things to reroute, things to fix and get on with while we are en route, it'll be so much more interesting. And this is just for the engineering segment. Now, the good news is, he says they are actively working on this system now, and it is not going to be a long time until we see it, as it all ties into this resource network system that they have been working on for quite a while now, and we should be able to try it sooner than later, but of course, no dates are given. Anyway, that was the Journey to 4.0 episode on engineering, which for me is incredibly exciting, and Jared did say that we will be checking back later on this year to see it in action being worked on. Now, as I say, I have always known the engineering mechanic is intended to be a very deep game mechanic, similar to something like Hard Space Shipbreaker, which is a great game, by the way, definitely a good way to get hyped for this new system. But the depth shown here, I feel, is above and beyond what I could have imagined, and I can't wait to see it start rolling out. A great episode, but we must move on. So this week's Star Citizen Live began chatting with Benoit, who is the head honcho over at the Turbulent studio in Montreal, and as usual, Star Citizen Live was very much a casual chat, just hanging out, and today was no different, learning more about Benoit and where Turbulent started to how they came to work with CIG. One question was, how is the building of the game development teams coming along? And if you didn't know, they are putting together full-time development teams in the Turbulent studio for Star Citizen, to work on Star Citizen. And he says currently they're up to about 50 to 60 people. These teams are building locations, they've got a ships team, a tools team, a character team, a gameplay team, a design team. They also have the in-game branding team, who are working on the signage and the brands in the game to make sure that they are all correlating with the lore and making sense. And then for the second half of Star Citizen Live, it was chatting to Nathan Dearsley, who is the Squadron 42 art director, and a chap called Jake, who is the assistant art director, again talking about who they are, their journey to get to where they are today with CIG. These are always nice chats just to hang out on a Friday afternoon, and if you would like to learn more about all these people that they met today, then do follow the link in the description below. However, there was no news about Star Citizen's development. So also this week, the roadmap was updated, which I have covered in a separate video linked below. The same goes for the Squadron 42 monthly report. This was reposted to Spectrum, but again, my video coverage of this update is also linked below in the description should you wish to check it out. Now, alongside the release of Alpha 3.18 to live, there were a few more posts, one detailing all of the new features to come with this build, one for the Vulture sale and one for the Scorpius Antares sale, plus a Q&A for the new Scorpius as well. So that brings us to the end of the show. If you do enjoy my content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Also, I am able to do this thanks to my very generous patrons and channel members. If you appreciate what I do and would like to help make it even better from as little as $1 a month, all of the links are provided below.